Hello and good morning, everyone, and welcome to Wow Wednesday. I am your host, Nancy Matthews, one of the founders of Women's Prosperity Network, coming to you on this particular Wednesday in celebration of Juneteenth. So I want to take a moment for us to pause and reflect and honor the fight that got us here. And the fight's not over. Just let me we still must stand for another color and arm in arm make it for equity and equality around. So we celebrate and honor this day and embrace it to move forward for all of us. That's when everybody gets to win. And today, I am excited to have Clayton Ferrara with us on this particular day because the work that he does is providing us with avenues and vehicles to make it easier to be of service to people, specifically through this nonprofit sector. So we're going to have an amazing conversation today. I know you will have many questions, so be sure to jot them down. We'll go for about 30 minutes of conversation, then we'll open up for Q&A. So have pen and paper or your phone if you're a good note taker on your phone, which I've gotten really good at. And we'll make sure that you get served well today. So let me tell you a little bit about Clayton. I'm sure he's going to talk more about his background and how this path came about for him. He is a global nonprofit expert and the executive director of the United Nations Accredited NGO Ideas for Us. He is a classically trained biologist and world traveler who has conducted research on 5 continents concerning evolution, conservation, and ecology. His work as a leader of ideas focuses on advancing sustainability through the creation of solutions that help people heal the planet and grow prosperity in communities around the world. He serves on boards of numerous environmental and humanitarian nonprofits, land trusts, and belongs to many societies, some are secret, that bring him to interact with world leaders such as Pope Francis and the descendants of Charles Darwin. I could go on and on and on, and I think the best testament to Clayton for all of you is when he starts to share with us today about whether nonprofits are right for us. So welcome, my friend.
Oh, thank you, Nancy. I really appreciate it. And, I think that this is maybe my third or fourth talk with
Mhm.
you over the years, and I always really enjoy it so much. Speaking and educating around nonprofits is one of my passions because there's so many misconceptions about it. And I'm definitely someone who my entire life has been changed by my involvement in nonprofit organizations all the way back to my childhood and volunteering and spending time at places. So sharing all of this stuff is a huge pleasure. I'm really excited for today. So thank you
Yeah.
for holding the space and welcoming me.
You are most welcome, my friend. And for me, one of the reasons, as you said, it's your third or fourth time we've been together over the years, and I think we've known each other about 4 years now. One of the reasons that I bring you back is over the years, we coach and mentor women entrepreneurs, many of whom have a desire to create a nonprofit or they created a nonprofit and it was just kind of flailing or they didn't know what to do and there were misconceptions and it cost them a lot of money and it took a lot of time. And when I met you and you shared your process for taking people through it and all the nuances, like it's way more than filing a form with the state and with the IRS, right? And how you get funding. So let's jump into this conversation. For context, do me a favor and share the story of how you got started with your first nonprofit and the funding that came through other organizations. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, of course. So I think one of the most important things to start with is that um, nonprofit organizations need people like you all, entrepreneurs, people trying to make the world a better place. They really need you to serve in a volunteer capacity. Even if you're someone who isn't necessarily thinking of starting your own nonprofit organization. There are so many nonprofits out there that are in need of people tremendously. So I always start off by saying, this conversation is for everyone, because in our communities, there are organizations trying to do extraordinary things and they need help. So if you've never volunteered, if you've never served as a board member, if you've never been on an advisory board, I always want to start by encouraging people to do that, because these organizations need the special things that you all have. So that's a great place to start. And in fact, that's where I started in my nonprofit career, was as a volunteer. I grew up from when I was a little boy, loving nature and animals and the environment. And everywhere that I looked, I saw all of these environmental problems. And then when I would, see who was taking action and trying to do good to improve the conditions of the world, I always found nonprofit organizations. And I was lucky enough growing up in South Florida that there were many around me, and that would take volunteers, very young. And I remember one place that I started volunteering, their cutoff was you had to be 13 years old, and I had just turned 12. And I remember going there and kind of mentally preparing in the car ride, probably one of my first pitches ever, to go
12
there.
years old.
And 12, yeah, I'd literally just turned 12, and going there to pitch to them as to why they should let me volunteer at the sea turtle hospital. And I was successful and started volunteering a year younger than everybody else. So, it starting as a volunteer and coming from that place, my ears were open, my eyes were open, and I saw so many things that I'll never forget. I remember what it was like showing up to one place to volunteer, and my parents dropped me off on a Saturday. This was a small coastal nature center, and there was a sign on the door that said to call Monday because their volunteer coordinator was gone. And come to find out that they didn't get a grant that they thought that they were going to get, and they had to lay the person off, and they didn't tell the volunteers, and the entire summer volunteer program was vaporized in that one moment. And at that time, geez, I was maybe 15, 14. And to this day now, of course, running my own organization, that's something, that I carry with myself, and so many other perspectives. In my college career, though, after I finished my academic studies, I knew that I wanted to launch a nonprofit organization, and started the craft of learning how to do that, and filing the paperwork, and launching a few different organizations. I think that probably the biggest thing on my path, though, was when I came together with a group of students from a college in my community it was 11 miles away from where I went to school. So we were right in the same community. And this group of students were a year to 2 years younger than me, right? So I had just graduated college, and most of them were juniors and seniors still. And they had launched a club on campus called Intellectual Decisions on Environmental Awareness Solutions. And,
Ah,
and they went by the word ideas in all caps with dots in between. And it stood for Intellectual Decisions on Environmental Awareness Solutions. And I loved the fact that even though they were a college club, they were focused entirely on action. In the environmental world, there's a lot of advocacy focus, and that's very important. It's important for educating the public. It's important for changing policy. It's important for all kinds of things. But really what was key for me was action. And I liked that we got to play that side of the coin, in being that kind of group. But we were just a college club, and, I was 22. We were just starting off in our what would become our careers, right? So it was quite fascinating in the fact that we had no idea what we were doing. I had maybe a shadow of a doubt of knowing what I was doing from my experience just volunteering and being on the scene. I knew what it looked like when a nonprofit was functioning. right? So we would kind of mimic those things. But lo and behold, that's 16 years ago. And, as you 16 years ago, and as you said, it's been a wild ride. Today we're a United Nations accredited nonprofit. We do work in almost 40 different countries around the world. We have been through it all. And, we had, not even two nickels to rub together when we started. And last year we did over $3 million. And this year we're going to beat that by
Wow.
maybe 2x.
Wow.
So, we're really growing, and we're just very excited for the work that we do. Our mission at Ideas for Us is to develop ideas and fund action and scale solutions. And so developing ideas in communities and funding the action that comes out of that, and then measuring what works and scaling those things. Maybe they're going to become spin-off companies. Maybe they'll become policies. Maybe they'll become an ordinance or a mandate. Maybe they'll become a bona fide program that persists in a community. And all of that is designed around solving our most pressing environmental challenges, right? So we do work in energy and water and food and waste and ecology. But all through this, especially once I kind of got involved with Vatican in particularly, I kind of realized that we really need thousands, if not tens of thousands of nonprofits trying to do this.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll certainly say I've got one of the best organizations around for sure, but that doesn't mean that we don't need 100 of them doing the
Right.
exact same thing in communities around the world in order to really make a difference.
Well,
So
and
this is where my
as
passion came from for launching new organizations and helping people build them.
as I mentioned it before the call started, you're wearing a pin
Yeah.
that is representative of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And that encompasses all areas of, people and equity and food and poverty and all of those pieces, which is why we need so many different nonprofits.
Yeah.
So many different people to be in action. Right.
Yeah,
And
absolutely. So this pin has 17 different colors on it. If you can kind of see that. And
Mhm.
as you mentioned, it's called the Sustainable Development Goals. This was something that was first proposed in 2012, and they were ratified in 2015. One of the largest collaborative international efforts to create the Sustainable Development Goals and all the different targets and indicators that are inside of them. And well, with something like sustainable development goals, you would think that it's just all tree hugging and solar panels, but it's certainly not just that, as wonderful as those things are. It is a lot of other things. It's things like gender equality, and it's things like creating jobs and ending modern day slavery and human trafficking. It's things like advocating for peace and justice in legal systems around the world. It's advocating for clear and transparent and just laws in countries around the world. So there are so many elements that fold into sustainability, right? And I always say war is the most environmentally destructive thing that there is. And there are a lot of places that are unfortunately suffering from war right now around the world. It's easy to see how all of these things overlap into one another. So this is where this kind of drive came from for me to create a company that specializes in coaching nonprofits that have stalled out in their efforts and want to get back on the horse and do bigger and better things than they ever have before, and also to have an organization or a business that sets up new nonprofits. Because I was really surprised at once I started doing this work, just how many people were kind of coming out of the woodwork to me to share that this is something that they had always wanted to do, but didn't know how to get started. And if anything, that's really inspiring. There's so many people that want to help and want to do good in the world. They just don't know how to get started. So, again, it's like, hey, if you've ever thought about being part of an organization, please volunteer, please sit on a board, please sit on an advisory board. open some doors and make connections, urge the businesses you own or work with to be philanthropic and to support causes you care about. It's really important stuff.
Mhm. And, in that vein, I think what the confusion on how to set up a nonprofit, is it right for me? And then the burning question, I need to pay my bills, or how am I going to get the money? And I don't know how to go for the money for funding. And maybe there's a misconception, I think, right now that everything's dried up and people don't donate. Like, let's
Well,
burst some of those bubbles.
that's quite not the case. And so much, in fact, that we have seen, believe it or not, unprecedented numbers. And I'm not just talking about my own organization, even though we did experience the best financial years we've ever had during and coming out of COVID. But this is essentially what's been going on globally as well. Let's just look at the United States. So in 2021, right, still dealing with COVID, very bizarre year, not quite as bizarre as 2020, but definitely the runner-up as far as bizarre years go. In 2021, this is just in the United States, $485 billion was donated in that year. $485 billion, right? That is so much money. It's wild to think about.
Mhm.
To put into comparison, even money flowing out of the Inflation Reduction Act right now for energy retrofitting of buildings across the entire United States right now is budgeted in a $2 million bucket, right? Or $2 billion, $2 billion bucket right now. So 485 billion being donated. Now, the fascinating thing is 67% of that, right? That comes out to like $327 billion. $327 billion was donated by individuals, right? So that's a really fascinating
That's
thing.
big. Yeah.
And these are people who are not making multi-million dollar contributions, right? Foundations only donated 90 billion. Corporations, which people tend to think give the most money, and this often comes because they're the loudest, right? They only donated $21 billion in 2021. So
Wow.
67% of that coming from individuals, is is huge. And
Mhm.
to me, that's really inspiring. And those numbers have, continued to plateau and potentially even rise. So weirdly enough, it's a great time to launch an organization. People tend to understand that there's an extreme need, and that I think also people are tired of sitting on the sidelines and not doing anything, and especially seeing that our government isn't necessarily going to solve all of the problems for us either, right?
Mhm.
There's a large element of people power here.
Well, and one of the let's to talk about the government for a minute. Like, I know that there are buckets of money that the government sets aside for people, for nonprofits to use to further the goals, but how do you get access to those, and how do you file for them, and all those other pieces? That's
Yeah.
where a lot of the confusion comes in. Um, let's talk a little bit about advantages or disadvantages of having a nonprofit.
Yeah, sure. I mean, maybe let's start with the disadvantages. So the disadvantages is that just like anything else, it requires work, right? And I think that
It's
a
funny.
lot of people think like, oh, I have my nonprofit status. Someone is just going to donate to me because I'm a nonprofit, right? Or someone is just going to you know, I don't know, that the gates of heaven are going to open just because they have a 501(c)(3) status, right? It's just like a business. If the thing that you're doing, if the thing that you're selling isn't of value to someone and isn't solving a problem, then the value of it, right, decreases. If you look at the organizations that are the wealthiest and the companies that are the wealthiest in the world, they're selling something or solving a problem that is of extraordinary value, and that makes them in high demand. right? So if you want to have a successful nonprofit, you have to focus on the value that you're creating and how you can increase that and drive that forward tremendously. So that's a really important thing. I'd say another downside is, and this may be something that I tend to view as a positive, but not everybody does. And usually the people that don't view it as a positive, I always say that this is a great thing for character development. But a nonprofit is a team sport. It's not something that anyone does alone. In fact, legally, you can't do it alone. You have to have a board of at least 3 people, right? So having a nonprofit is a team sport. And for many type A personality solopreneurs, the idea of delegating or listening to anyone else or involving them in their decision-making process is not attractive to them. And so having a nonprofit forces them to realize that those are very naive viewpoints to have. And that one of the most important things that we can do is challenge ourselves constantly, right? And I think that that's a big part of where I credit myself being able to get where I have, is that I have a team and I make sure that it's very clear to them that even though I'm the CEO, I want them to constantly question the things that I'm doing, and I'm constantly striving to learn from other organizations and learn from academic literature, and always question, how am I so sure that I'm right? Right?
That's a great question.
Right? How am I so sure? What makes me so sure that I'm right about what I'm trying to do in any sense? Right? So examining that is important, and some people don't want to do that, right? So that could be a negative. I also think that having a nonprofit organization, what could potentially be a negative, right, is that it forces you to get your limiting beliefs with money, not just out in the open, but in a way to where your team's survival depends on you breaking through that wall. And many people have limiting beliefs about money, and it's definitely something that traps them for sure, right? And usually what it takes to break through that is to make the stakes so high that you have no other choice. And usually that means when other people depend on you, right? And I work pretty darn hard at the type of things that I do, but I know that I don't work anywhere near how hard I'll work when I have a family and have children. That's something I'm absolutely positive of, because once someone else is depending on you for everything, right? It just, the game gets real. Things become so much more serious, right? So those are the kinds of things that if you're uncomfortable with being a team player, if you're uncomfortable about asking for money, being around money, thinking about money, seeking money, needing it to scale projects and programs and having other people depend on you in those particular ways, a nonprofit may not be for you. And the role that you play in the organization could be a great board member or something like that, but maybe not the founder of an organization. So that's why, as a team, everyone has a role to play in nonprofits, right? You could be someone who just wants to focus on really cool logo design for flyers for awesome initiatives in your community. And boy, oh boy, do nonprofits need you. You could be someone who writes great blogs or body copy about things, or is an awesome photographer, right? Or just super passionate about inviting people in their community to different kinds of initiatives and events, right? That person could have a great role in a nonprofit organization. Now, as far as some of the perks, there's a lot. I would say that probably some of the biggest perks to having a nonprofit is that you can do everything a conventional business can do, plus a whole heck of a lot more. So nonprofits just have access to way more money than a conventional business does. There's grants and foundations and state money and federal money. There's funding from companies. There's funding from individuals that are looking for a tax write-off or are looking to lower their capital gains taxes through donations. And a nonprofit is essentially a tool for all of those things. It's essentially a tool for moving around tax burden, right? Because Louis Vuitton is one of our funders for something called the Solutions Fund that we have. And in their philanthropy, right? Well, why are they doing that, right? Well, they're doing it because they understand that their sector of luxury goods is an extractive sector. They depend on natural resources in order to have their business. So they want to make an impact in a positive way there. But they also have a social responsibility and an economic responsibility, especially as a European publicly traded company under LVMH.
Mhm.
And, that is factors that add into that. If I was just some guy or had a for-profit company, there's no way that they would ever give me money. It'd be the opposite of the transaction, right? But in the case to where you're a nonprofit, now you're seen as a resource to give to so that you can go out and do your work, right? That's a really important dynamic. So access to more money is a big perk. I'd say the big number two is that when you have a nonprofit, the vibe that you have around you and the work that you do is just different. Uh, if you were to come into a room full of business leaders at a conference or something like that, right? Just alerting them, oh, I have such and such company, I do XYZ. Oh, that's cool. Everyone's very usually positive and encourages one another. But I have seen it and done it myself and watched people do it time and time again, probably hundreds of times now over my career. But you start talking about, oh, I have a nonprofit. And immediately everyone is like, oh, really? Tell me more. What does your organization do? What kind of work do you focus on? How can we help you? So
Yeah.
interesting that the default to most people, when you tell them that you have a nonprofit, is how can I help you? Is such a fascinating shift from why should I give you my time and attention to
Mhm.
how can I help you just from the fact that you have a nonprofit. So the vibe, the way that you move in a room, the way that you network, the way that you serve as an attractant to people who are passionate about something similar to you, or just passionate about trying to make the world a better place is so powerful. Everything changes when you have a 501c3 and you start to share the fact that you do, regardless of the money and the programs and the impact that you're able to make, right? Which will come in the growth and development of the organization. But the foundational stuff that I really concentrate on is really about how someone orients themselves in the world as a nonprofit, because that was the piece of the puzzle that I saw that was missing from
Yeah.
so much nonprofit education out there. So I'd say that rounds out some positives and negatives of the whole thing.
Yeah. And I know that you've helped, Barry and I have a nonprofit that you helped us put together. We've gotten some funding and now we're looking at getting more funding. So yay, thank you for
Wonderful.
that. And I think three or four others that I know you've made a difference. And one of them is Camille Robb. And so here's Camille. I don't know if she's with us today. And for 20 years, she's been just helping people with and helping in poverty. And she has this food bank and all out of her own pocket, right? Which is a beautiful thing. And so tell that story a little bit, and then we're going to open up for some questions.
Yeah, of course. So, a lot of people are already active doing great things, right?
Mm,
And often they're paying for them themselves out of their pocket, out of the kindness of their hearts. And what's really cool is that once you have a nonprofit organization, the opportunity for others to give to you and have you not be doing this all on your own immediately appears,
mhm,
right? Just asking people to give you money as just an individual is weird. And everybody knows that that's weird. It feels weird. There's a lot of suspicion and confusion. Interestingly enough, once, of course, you have a nonprofit, the conversation changes and it becomes around, well, what are some of the things that I can, do and scale and bring to the table? And as people hear about those things, they want to help. So there's plenty of examples of people that I've helped to create an organization. They've then been able to do exactly what they were doing, but now recruit people to help them. right? And to come into the fold and to be there for them in making the organization thrive. A great example is there's a physician who I helped launch his organization, and he'd been sending radiation machines to India and to Ethiopia for 20 years and was bankrolling all of this himself. And what's amazing is that he was able to hold a dinner party at his house and announce his nonprofit organization to all of the different attendees. And just through that one event of announcing he had a nonprofit, all of the doctors that he brought from the hospital and from a few hospitals surrounding, doctors that were retired, he received $50,000 worth of pledges in just that evening for people to donate to him that year and help with this process. So really amazing, in that particular aspect. And I was really just tremendously struck by that and thought that it was a wonderful thing. So,
And let's keep in mind, right? So you talked about limiting beliefs about money, and it can be uncomfortable to ask for money. And I want all of us to think about that moment where we get to be the ones who give. So those doctors, and that he had in the room, they get to be a part of making the change because the gentleman who formed the nonprofit did the heavy lifting, because it does take work. So
yep.
now you and I serve on the board for Camille, as well as Visionaries of Light with Barry. I get to be a part when Camille goes to the Congo and is feeding the children and bringing them clothes and supplies. I'm a part of that because I serve on the board. Like, we get to do that. And so I want everybody to think about, when you're asking someone to give, you're actually giving them the gift of giving. So we want to remember that. So Clayton, you have formed how many nonprofits for people now? Last time I talked, it was just over 100.
Yeah, we're over 200 and since 2009. So it's been pretty wild.
It's amazing, and you do such a stellar job. So let me open up and get people ready to ask some questions. So if you're with us on Zoom, you just hit *6. If you're on your phone, raise your hand if you are with us on Zoom. If you're watching through Facebook, feel free to post a question in the comments, and I will be sure to bring it to the table. Let's talk about, as people are coming into queue, a little bit about the process, of forming a nonprofit. And if I'm forming a nonprofit and it requires work, time, and attention, and I need to grow my business, like, can I get paid through the nonprofit? Like, what are the rules around that stuff?
Yes, of course. So you can absolutely get paid for having a nonprofit organization. Certainly, people have different goals in the organization. If you want to be employed by the organization and your goal is to, man, I hate my job, I'm ready to start a nonprofit, I'm going to build this thing as my side hustle, and eventually I want to step into that full time, right? Fantastic. That's what I did, right? In my life, I'm CEO of my organization. I'm an employee of it, right? So, but there's a process that you go through to do this. When you first start, and you have a board of directors, that board of directors is volunteer for the nonprofit. That's very interesting, that a nonprofit is structured to where it's led by a group of passionate individuals that are volunteers, that are giving their time for free. And in fact, they can't be paid for their role as a board member. So if a board member is going to be paid by the organization, they can, but it's only for a role that's separate than their role as the board member. Meaning, classic example, there's a lawyer on the board, they own a law firm, or they're in a private practice of some kind, and they are the best person to draft some legal documents for the organization, as an example. And essentially what happens is the board comes together, recognizes there's a conflict of interest, votes without that person being involved. If it passes, they're then paid for their service as the lawyer for the organization and uh, continue serving as a board member. Right. So there's different ways to navigate those types of things. But traditionally, what happens is as the organization grows, someone who's wanting to be employed will either go through a process of applying to the organization, if those are the stipulations that are put out in front of it, or they're just kind of, jump right into the saddle and everybody agrees on that. And they step off of the board and they become an employee of the organization and they replace their place on the board or not. If they have enough people on the board and they don't need to add an additional person, maybe they just shift someone else into their vacant role, right? And focus on filling that role. So there's absolutely the pathway for doing those things. And I would say that for a lot of people, that's the goal. But if you're going to get yourself in a situation to where you're all in and your organization is, its success is a do or die thing for you personally, right? You have to make sure that when you do take that jump, that both the organization and the individual are as prepared as possible. And that's another thing that I really coach people through because it's something that I've been through and really understand. And I've seen it done the right way, and I've seen it done the wrong way. To where, I took the jump full time into my organization in 2017. So 2017, and we formed in 2008. So I spent a lot of time as a volunteer of the organization. And even when we had money, we didn't hire a CEO first. That's kind of useless. I was already the CEO for free. So why would I hire a CEO? The first person we hired was a web guy, because we couldn't do coding and tech related stuff on our website ourselves. So that was the first person we hired. Second person that we hired was an accountant, because we were starting to get so many transactions in our books and we were so busy doing the work that we just didn't have time for that. Third person we hired was a program director to be able to expand our reach into new territories and stake out new income streams to drive even more capital to the organization. Right. And finally, the fourth person that we hired was a CEO finally. Right. But it took years and we very methodically pumped every penny into the organization that we raised, even to the tune of hundreds of thousands of dollars. We resisted the urge to hire ourselves for years, pumping all of the money into the organization to build our brand and our impact portfolio, to show that we were truly head and shoulders above our competition and our impact, right? I remember when I first became a UN delegate and I traveled to something called the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil in 2012. I was in a room with Richard Branson and Jean-Michel Cousteau and Jane Goodall, and we're sitting at this massive table in Rio. And we're there as part of the youth delegation to the Rio summit. And I remember thinking to myself, we have no paid staff. Our office is my living room. We work out of coffee shops. Our entire team is volunteer. And I'm sitting in this room at this table with these extraordinary people. And they probably have no idea that we are this little grassroots ragtag organization. But we got there because we came on the radar of the UN and we applied to become an accredited NGO. And our track record had them approve us. And they never knew that we were, just one or two evolutionary steps away from being in the dorm room as a college club.
Right. Yeah.
So that was an extraordinary time. And, I say those things because this stuff takes time and it takes dedication and it takes grit. Some of the most interesting things is when I have clients that are very wealthy and they come to me and they say, hey, I've had an amazing, successful life. I'm ready to do something that I'm passionate about. Finally, I want to launch a nonprofit organization. I'm going to put about $5 million into it, and I need you to help guide me of what to do. And it's so interesting that By no means are their problems solved as an organization by literally having $5 million in cash. They have the same problems
Because
that
it only
every other
ran out
organization
to the
has.
host.
So that's definitely something that is really fascinating, is that by no means does money solve your problems in a nonprofit. You're still going to have to be able to do the thing that you're trying to do, which is often really lofty, difficult problems in the community that someone's trying to solve. Homelessness, addiction, bringing help to single parents, combating injustice and racism, fighting for the environment, feeding homeless kids. You know, the list goes on and on of things that nonprofit organizations focus themselves with. And, so it's a misnomer to think that just through waving the magic wand and a big sack of money appears, that all of a sudden it's going to be smooth sailing, because it's not. So that's a fascinating perspective for me to see as well, so that it just changes my approach to everything. It really is about these foundational things. And I'd love to answer some questions from your audience.
Yeah, beautiful. We've got some in queue. I want to highlight something you just said, and that was about you came on the radar of the UN and were in that room because of the impact you made, because of the decisions you made as the nonprofit was growing to stay focused on projects, stay focused on action. What can we do? And when you talk about my vision, my mission, I want to end poverty. Okay, how are we going to start to do that little bit at a time? Like, the phrase of one of my mentors uses, like, you're trying to boil the ocean. Like, let's start with a pot, right? And being able to identify those specific strategic ways. And let's face it, change happens at the micro level first, and then it grows from there. So that's where we want to be taking a look at. And I mention that because I know my community, this community here, each and every one of you have huge hearts and passions for making a big, big difference. And I know you're capable of it. And we want to take a look at how do we start to make an impact now? And then those measurements get us more recognition, more funding, all of those other pieces. You got to be specific, right?
Correct, of course.
Yeah.
There's no shortcuts that are meaningful, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's
Yeah.
definitely shortcuts that people can take in anything. But I think that when it comes to actually advancing the organization long term, it is a incremental process, because it also involves other people, and it also involves the variable of time, right?
Mhm.
Meaning, very often you have to follow the cycles of funding coming out of the government or of foundations or of just philanthropy, like with the fact that tax time happens in April and people shed cash before the end of the calendar year around the holiday seasons, right? There's also the variable of time in the fact that you're asking people to demonstrate some type of improvement in what is going on. Like if you're giving a scholarship to someone, or if you're helping them, access, medication to be healthier. There's time that comes into this, and a lot of these impacts are measured across time. So there's nothing you can do but wait and try to remain as productive as possible, when just sometimes these are time cycles that we have to abide to, because that's the currency in which the impact is judged, is the change over time, right? So there's not a lot of shortcuts, and the ones that do exist aren't very meaningful long term.
Yeah, good. Thank you for that. All right, we've got several questions in the queue and the comments. I'm going to bring them all. First, let's hear from Betsy Razum.
Oh, good morning. Good morning. I'm going to have to listen to the beginning of this. I got on a little bit late, but thank you so much. I'm in the process of considering creating a nonprofit. I do a more holistic healing process for women who have experienced a trauma from either in domestic violence and or sex trafficking. And the problem for me is the people I want to work with can't afford it. And I want to serve these women. And I'm really concerned about getting paid for it.
Of course.
And how do I start just working pro bono and start establishing why this works, the success rates, before I go and actually create the nonprofit? Or what would be the best thing to do first?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. I mean, I think that because you already are performing this for people that can pay, you have a use or kind of a client outcome, portfolio already, right? You can show that this type of stuff works and that it's very important for healing people and helping them to set things right in their lives after experiencing trauma. What you're describing is the perfect use for a nonprofit organization, is that the nonprofit essentially becomes a foundation of your for-profit company. You can donate from your for-profit company to the nonprofit. You can raise money through a whole multitude of ways for the nonprofit organization. And as it builds up capital in an account, right, you can then offer scholarships for people, partial or in full, right, through whatever process you decide to. And ultimately, that's the model of most colleges and universities, right? This is what Harvard Business School called social enterprise in the 1980s, when this concept kind of first came on the scene. But basically, it's the aspect that, hey, if you can afford full price, you can pay that. If not, then there's scholarships or a mixture of scholarships that are available for people to utilize. So very common model, often very successful. And there's a lot of different channels that you could access funding. There's health departments and there's foundations that focus on women's issues. There's things like the UN Women Cohort. There's the fact that as a nonprofit, you could bring universities and students to study the impacts of what you're doing and produce white papers that can strengthen your argument for funding. There's a lot of things that could come into play that'll help you build that.
Wow, that's great. Well, I guess one of the things that concerns me is that when I do the work, this is very private, and I have to keep confidentiality. So, giving the information about how successful it is, I can't give names.
Yeah, of course.
That has always been a concern to me.
Well, there's ways to do blind studies and things like that. So, I mean, there's been lots of studies done in the medical fields with confidentiality at mind. So there's a path.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, and certainly I think you can change people's names if you're going to tell a story, and give an example, and Betsy accomplished XYZ from this particular instance, and there's definitely ways to protect people, of course, and that's an important aspect too. But in a nonprofit organization, one of the most important things that you can do is storytell and is communicate to people, because people give to people. Here's just, we'll take more questions, but I just want to share this story with everybody. There was a fascinating study that was done about which ad would gain more donations. One of the ads was a bunch of children that are in a rough situation, in a slum, in a developing country, and it says every day 10,000 kids go to sleep hungry, help one. And that was one ad. And the other ad is just this little girl smiling. She looks happy. And it says, Susie, has food 3 meals a day. She's doing great. Help kids like her. And they looked at which ad generates more revenue as far as donations go. And by 3 times difference, right? A 3x statistical difference. People gave to the ad with one kid on it because subconsciously they see the problem in its grandiosity at them. 10,000 kids going to bed hungry. Look at these poor children. Oh my God, what can I do? Is just one person, right? So that became a really big aspect of what can they do as one person and how can they, make a difference. But when they saw an example of a difference having already been made in one person's life, they thought, well, I can do that too, right? So that's a fascinating aspect to think about. People give to individuals, they give to the change of an individual, and imagine it extrapolated across many people. So always leading with stories of the individual is a very important way to attract people into the fold.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Betsy. Great question. And I love the timeliness of this for you, especially, and those listening in. Clayton, let people know like how they can get in touch with you. Like what would be the next step for Betsy or several others? And we'll be taking some more questions in a minute.
Of course. So probably the easiest way to get a hold of me is to just send me an email. And I'm going to put my email in the chat here for those of you that are on Zoom. For those of you that may be watching on Facebook or are watching a recording of this, you can find my website at protegenonprofitsolutions.com. So that's protege, Protege, and then the word nonprofit, and then the word solutions with an S, because more than one solution, right? And .com. And my email is Clay, C-L-A-Y, which is my name, and then at protegenonprofitsolutions.com. And I'm going to put that into the chat right now for you to see. So you can reach out to me that way. And
I put it on Facebook as well.
Perfect. And certainly if you forget or whatnot, Nancy's a fantastic resource to connect me to other people and has been so kind to do that over the years. So please do that. And certainly if you're reaching out from this webinar, I'm offering a 1-hour free consultation with me to just ask all of your questions about nonprofit organizations. So if that's something that you're interested in, please take advantage of that. But make sure that you let me know that you are from Wow Wednesdays, and I will know to give you that free consultation. And regardless of whether or not and regardless of whether or not we wind up working together, my goal in this 1-hour call is to just factually answer your questions. And there's so much misunderstanding about nonprofits. People think that they can't make a profit. People think that they can't pay their staff. People think that they have to have a certain percentage of money that they raise compared to how much they spend on projects, compared to how much they spend on staff, and that these are things that are set in law. But much of that is a misnomer or half-truths, and it's really important to just know things from a factual standpoint, and then you can make the decision on whether this is something that's good for you or not to launch, or like I said, just get out there and volunteer, right? And be part of doing good things in your community.
Yeah, good. All right, we got a couple of questions from Facebook, and then I'm going to go to Stacy Clark. Rose, reach out to Clay. I saw your question in the comments. So Deb Nye has a question. If someone wanted to donate land to a nonprofit that she hasn't created yet, how is that taxed when it's transferred? How does that work? So I own a piece of land. I want to donate it to a nonprofit.
Yes, so this is one of my favorite types of organizations to set up. And one of the most common ones that I set up is a land trust, right? So for starters, let's just look at the aspect. Nonprofits can absolutely own land. They can own real estate. They can own parking garages. They can own apartment buildings. They can own residential housing. They can own vacant lots and pay $0 in real estate tax and property tax. So holding land with a nonprofit is a fantastic way to escape taxes of every single kind. It is also a great way to make sure that your land is protected and overseen by a group of people that have the land's best interest in mind. Here's a great story. I have a client that I set up a land trust for outside of Gainesville. They donated their own land to the land trust and started a commune on the site. They were so successful on TikTok and gained so many millions of followers that the Discovery Channel bought them 50 acres of land in Minnesota and filmed a reality TV show on their property and gifted them the land afterwards to their land trust as a donation. So they now have 4 pieces of land spread out across the country that are in their portfolio that they manage as a land trust, right? So that's a really great way for people to
Awesome.
manage those types of things. So if you're interested in doing something like that, let's definitely talk. And certainly there'd be a tax write-off for the donation of the land, right? Because that has a cash value to it, right? Once it's appraised, and donating that land to a nonprofit yields a tax receipt that you can bring to your accountants that are managing your tax burden, and can take you through that process, right? Depending on how you file your taxes. So that's a big aspect as well.
I told you he's brilliant. That's why he's here. And it's back. There are things about nonprofits and ways to get funding and taking advantage of the tax laws and all these other nuances. I've never met someone with as much knowledge about this and as much passion at helping people get their projects launched and funded, launched in the right way. Because I've seen people form nonprofits in the wrong way, and it was a waste of time, energy, and money. So if you're thinking about launching a nonprofit, if you've got one and it's stalled, please reach out to Clay. His email is Clay, CLAY, at protegenonprofitsolutions.com. Let me go ahead and go to Stacy Clark, and then actually I'm going to read Raksha's question, but Stacy, you'll be up next. So Raksha works with nonprofits providing mindset and entrepreneurship training. She also supports them creating their business plans. How can I monetize on this and get to work with more organizations providing this service?
Yes. If you could just repeat the first part of that question. For some reason,
she provides mindset and entrepreneur training, and she serves nonprofits by doing business plans, mindsets, entrepreneur training, but she wants more of them.
Okay, so I would say that you should definitely think about where to find nonprofits in the community, right? So for starters, see if there's a community foundation that's local to your county or metro region. They usually have listings of all of the nonprofits in the area. That's certainly one way. There's also a list that is published. It's called Form 770. And it's a list of all of the 501c3 nonprofits in the United States. You can get it off of irs.gov. And you can search by zip code or city. So I would look up the list that way, right? And you can see all of the 501c3 status organizations and reach out to them, in that way. And then just, if there's a good nonprofit scene in your community, then there's some predictable places that the nonprofits will be. Go join the local chambers of commerce, go to the Chamber of Commerce meetings, see if there's a philanthropic or nonprofit school being offered at colleges or institutions in your community. Show up at those types of things. Go to business and venture pitch competitions in the community and ask around about nonprofits. Go to Google and go to events or meetup.com and put in your local community and type in the word nonprofit and just see what comes up. Type in fundraisers or charities or all of these types of things. They're usually doing events and engaging people and being active and dynamic in the community, right? So any good nonprofit is going to make it really easy for you to find them. So all you have
And
to do is look and use some of those keywords and the language that the nonprofit uses to talk about what it is that they're doing, right? And you'll find them. And don't forget, every church, every religious institution, mosque, ashram, temple, synagogues, you name it, are all nonprofits, every single one of them, because that's how they are able to own their land that they have tax-free, is by being a nonprofit. That's why churches don't pay real estate tax or property taxes, because they're a nonprofit, right? So those types of organizations are nonprofits too. Colleges and universities are nonprofits. Credit unions are nonprofits. Many insurance companies are nonprofits. Hospitals are often nonprofits, right? So the list goes on. Sports teams are often nonprofits, right? So, so many brands that make up the fabric of our society, and that are often some of the most well-known brands out there, happen to be nonprofits as well. So that's an important thing for sure.
amazing. And we are at the top of the hour, and I want to respect Clay's time. We could go on and on and on. We've got a couple of other questions in the chat. I'm sorry we didn't get a chance to take your live questions. Let's do this. Email Clay, let him know that you met him through Wow Wednesday, and you can just send off a quick question, and or let him know if you want to have a conversation with him. I highly, highly recommend working with Clay, because as you can tell, there are so many things we don't know that we don't know, and he knows. So that's the path to follow. So Clayton, thank you so much
Of course.
for
Pleasure's all
sharing your
mine.
heart, your wisdom, and your passion, and for the great work that you do through Ideas for Us, as well as the over 200 other nonprofits that you've helped bring into the world. You're
Well, thank
amazing,
you
my
so
friend.
much. It's really a tremendous pleasure, and I look forward to meeting some of the new faces that I'm seeing on this Zoom. So thank you so
Awesome.
much.
You're most welcome. All right, everyone. Remember to email Clay, CLAY, at protege nonprofitsolutions.com. He's generously offering you a consultation with him. And just be sure to mention Wow Wednesday. Get out there, make a difference, be the change you want to see in the world. Go volunteer to get started, make an impact. We love and appreciate you all, as we love and appreciate you, Clayton. Have a beautiful day, everyone. Bye-bye now.
Thanks, everybody.